Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, I know that I've kind of destroyed this setting of really nice sofas and lounge, but I think coming after lunch, and if you had the pizza like me, the idea of sitting down for the afternoon is not a good idea. So I'm going to keep moving around. Trust. How does it shape our lives today, and how is it likely to change? If you were making a payment, if you went outside and you went to that pizza van, the same as I did, and they made you pay with cash, what they actually make you do is, you're actually making a promise to pay. The guy's going to give you a pizza, and you're going to work out what the value of that pizza is. And bearing in mind they made you pay in cash, you probably use one of these things. Now, what's really interesting is, I said it's a promise to pay. You probably know this, but on every note in the UK, there's a line that says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. It's been on banknotes in the UK now since... Scottish, I must stick it back in my pocket very securely. It's been on banknotes since 1694. Yeah? So when you're making a payment, you know the value or the equity you're about to exchange for the goods or services you want. And that works really well face-to-face, when you can judge who you're giving it to, and you can judge what value you're getting back. But look at our world now. Our world's becoming more digital. And as it becomes digital, so we end up thinking about, what bits do I not know? In future, I might not know who I'm actually dealing with. I might never have met them. I might be working on reputation alone. I might also be dealing with someone in different currencies, or in a different time zone, or a different part of the world. And if something goes wrong, how does it all work out? How do we resolve ourselves? So the digital trust challenge is significantly more difficult. And yet, if you look at all the startups and all the ideas out there, there is an exchange of goods or services for everything we do. So we need to make sure that that whole thing works out and it remains safe. It actually works when it's face-to-face with proximity and reputation. In fact, I heard a Swedish professor not so long back tell me a story. He said, if I want to buy milk in a store, my left hand's used to pick up the milk, and my right hand's used to pay with a card or give them the money over. It's dead simple. But if I want to buy milk online, or the equivalent of milk online, he said, it seems like they want marriage. He says, I only wanted milk. He says, and why? He said, because I've got concerns about trust, but so have the retailers. Everybody out there selling goods is going, am I shipping this to the right person? So the marriage part for him was, I've got to have your name. I've got to have your address because I can't ship it otherwise. I've got to have your telephone number. By the way, you need to give me an account number and an email address. And I want your password. Oh, and I want you to enter password again, just to make sure I got it right the first time. So there's all of these things going on. And why is that? Because there's an element of trust that we're trying to work out. Understand, these things will all be solved in time. We'll look back on that in 10 years and wonder what all the fuss was about. We'll have created the digital identities, we'll have married the pieces together, and it will be solved. But at the moment, we're in that early stages where we're linking between the physical world and the digital world and trying to make them all sit together. I mean, Mastercard has been working on this for years. We talk about, making sure we deliver on the payment promise at every aspect of what we do. And we do that across the world with 50+ billion transactions. It's silly numbers, 50 billion transactions per year. But of course, what we're trying to do is enable the digital world to go much, much further. And it's great, actually. I've been wandering around out there, hopefully you have too, talking to people and seeing people that I know from our Start Path program, seeing the challenger banks, which we deal with most of them, and trying to encourage it, and trying to encourage what they're doing. Collaboration will be critical for how we move forward. Now, these numbers, I am not going to bother reading them to you. I just kind of put them up there. This is where our world's going. Where we used to talk about millions of device points, we're talking about billions in the future. We also recognize that one there. I like the 2.5. Does anybody know how many zeros a quintillion is? I had to look it up. No one wants to put themselves up. Everybody knows what a gazillion is, but no one really knows what a quintillion is. A quintillion is 18 zeros. If 18 times zeros times 2.5 is going up every day, imagine how much data that is. In fact, at the last calculation, they say the amount of data that is available in the world today, 90% of it was created in the last 2 years. The last 2 years. Now, add to that streaming services, messaging services, how we're all communicating, how businesses are communicating. Think of how much data is coming now. And if we had the devices we have, and now we talk about, I love that we do talk about the Internet of Things. It does sound quite lovely. Almost like that Winnie the Pooh story that was happening on the stage just before me. It's lovely, it's things. But it's going to be big. And I'm using the figure of 50 billion IoT. I saw someone out there quoting 75 by 2025, so we must be playing the up it game. But there's a lot. There's a lot of devices. And if you think about that, if that 2.5 quintillion looks big, imagine what it's going to be like when we add the 50 billion devices rather than the 6 or 7 that we have today. It's a big change. It's going to change our lives. You know, we are going to be getting home to the coffee already brewed, to the heating system sorted out, the bath run, the programs resolved, and we'll all turn up in our autonomous vehicles. There is a lot of stuff, and all of that stuff needs to be connected. And how we connect it will be some of the biggest challenges. Society, in how it does that thing, has to take account of key aspects of what it's going to do to make the whole thing work. If you think about it, it's changed. We know it's changed the way in terms of how people operate. We talk about the digital native society. We talk about we don't really want to know the details. We just want it to automatically set up. We also know that as those things go on, there's more and more opportunities for getting things right. And actually, we're also changing the way we look at our society. Before, we thought a lot about the industrial or the manufacture base being really important. Today, we don't. I have 2 young daughters, teenagers, who, if they want something, they don't think, well, I'll go on Monday when I'm at school, and then I'll go to the shop and I'll go buy it. It comes into their head, they go to the PC, they log it on, they find it, they buy it, and they expect it to be delivered in 2 days. So we're moving to a very service-orientated world. And that's how we live. We don't think of going to the shops. I mean, that's actually the reverse end. We do that in the way we used to go. Taxis were a manufacturing point. You had a man with a service, and you were looking for a man with a taxi. No, we don't. We work on a service. Now we use an Uber or equivalent. And we, therefore, call it up. So the service-based economy that the world is moving to is primarily driven by the digital world. Digital and service are inextricably linked. That's what will drive the way we will see things in future. We won't put value where it comes from. We'll just put value that it's right, it arrives at the right time, and it arrives in my house in the right format. But think about the other side. For everything that is positive out there, there had to be someone on this stage that was going to come and talk about the negatives. And I did say, don't give my title, because I work on risk and security. So there had to be someone, a harbinger of doom, who would come and tell you bad stories, all right? Well, it's not really a bad story. It's all about what we're going to do to try and resolve it. In a digital world, we see constant, innovative, and persistent types of cyber attack now coming. We see the fact that cyber in itself has become a real business opportunity for many. And the criminals, if you think about crimes in the past, if you wanted to rob a bank in the past, you had to get past thick walls, thick doors, cameras, bars, and everything else. And there was a fair chance you're going to get caught and imprisoned or injured. Not today. In the way that the cyber is evolving, the cyber threat's evolving, it can happen from the other side of the world. And actually, there is quite a great deal of impunity to be able to catch people, even if we do. So we talk now about their biggest threat is they have anonymity, they have scale, and they have distance. And if they can apply those things correctly, you will find that that cyber part of business will become really significant. Clearly, we wish to stop that. I put down a couple of attack details. So FBI estimate that in 2016, the total value of ransomware revenue was $1 billion. $1 billion already. If we looked at mobile phone networks, we looked at the SMS verification of SS7, which was happening in Germany, or we looked at the web cams and some of the bot work that's going on there to look at webcams. I must admit, we were talking this through recently on Trends, saying how I love the fact that centennials actually invariably are never, my daughter cannot clean her bedroom for love nor money, yeah? Has never put a plate in a dishwasher, doesn't even know where the dishwasher is, but ask her to operate her Mac or her tablet without having a post-it or a sticker over the camera, it's not going to happen. I actually quite have some fun. I sometimes take it off to see what actually happens, and she pretty much instantly spots it and sticks it back on again. So that's the nature. Bangladesh, if you look at banks, Bangladesh Bank, and you probably know the story from a year and a bit ago, $100 million was taken out of them, disappeared. $100 million. Think if you were robbing a bank, what it would take to get $100 million out the front door or the back door and into a car. And what sort of car would it be to be able to do it? And I put light on it, but I must say, the 100 million was all they got away with. What they were actually shooting for if they'd gone for the full amount was 951 million. It's a big, big number. So if you want me to tell you a positive story, what I will tell you is it will get better. We will sort out this blurring between the digital societies, the digital giants. We'll all work it out. We will get it together, but we need to collectively put effort into it. And what I can guarantee you at the moment is it's probably likely to get worse before it gets better. When Gartner talk about this, they use a story which says, they say the risk increases exponentially as you move towards the edge of your network. Stable systems, be they payment or anything else, logistics, work really well when they work on the core. But as they start expanding, and that's what digital does, it expands it significantly, so the risk increases. Think of it like your house. You have a front door and a back door, potentially. Imagine I could put a house on every wall. How convenient would that be? Great. It improves things remarkably. What does it also do? It increases your vulnerability. You need to make sure you've locked every door. And you also realize that some doors are less secure than others, so people are going to find ways to do it. Because if there's money to be made, people will find how to get into it. And that's really a key piece of how we look at going forward. We talk about the risk of development as well. One of the big challenges I kind of preach out there is just the watch out, which is as we focus in on the idea of building better, more convenient, super slick apps and how we think about the APIs and what we're building, the SDKs, we've also got to think, have we built safety and security into this? Have we made sure that this thing can't be hacked? Because for all the efforts we put into our business models, if that business model is taken down or the reputation is damaged, it is significant. And the way I talk to people about it, I tend to say, look, if we weren't in the payments industry, but where we were was we built planes, would it be acceptable to build a super cool plane, super slick, but with no promise whatsoever that when it gets in the air, it isn't going to fall out the air in flames and crash on the ground? No. You've got to start with security as a get-go. I'm not saying, and there is a real point there, which is I'm not saying make security at the point of trading convenience, because that's not going to be acceptable in the new digital world. Everything needs to work together. The great advantage you have is technology overcomes the hurdles. If you can look at it, 3-4 years ago, we would have said, I can make it safe or I can make it easy. Technology will allow us to put those two things together, and that's what everybody's working on today. So that's really critical. Cybersecurity is big business, as I said. For all that we talk about trust, out there you will also find that if you take a little look, and I encourage you to look on the surface web and not in the dark web, but you'll find plenty of it, the cyber guys have worked out there's serious money to be made here. They're running, they're doing ratings on themselves. They're doing reviews. They've got 24/7 support. If you want to phone up and have someone support your call in a different way, they'll do it in different languages. They are very much set up because there's money to be made there. So you need to be aware that as we go into that we're up against a mentality where a lot of these things can be developed in really interesting ways. There's people who are doing things that may not be the final crime. They may not be robbing the bank, but they're still putting the information out there available for others. And as well as that, in the way it's been constructed, you also find now that you don't need to be an expert to be a hacker. And you'll know that from some of the ransomware work going on. People can actually pick up quite easily, go on YouTube, do some tutorials, and they'll be able to use existing and freeware tools to be able to get ransomware out there. So the threat is not the few, it can now be the many. So having got you on that and frightened the heck out of you on that, the solution as we talk about it is you've got to think about interoperability. And interoperability and the reputation we talked about are the critical parts going forward. So how do we make it safe? Well, OK. We talk about it in terms of safety by design. And the term intelligent connectivity, when I look behind me, the intelligence is about putting it together. So when I talk about it, I talk about layers. The first layer is the prevent layer. It's like building a castle. You put a moat around it, you build big walls on it, and you try and make sure that everything you put into market is as safe as it can be. So we talk about EMV-based technology. We put in preventive tools that keep data safe, that keep the mobile safe. We talk about tokenization, encryption. All of these are available tools, known sciences. Work with people that can help you make sure that you are safe from the beginning, please. The second part is securing the individual. If someone is going to buy something, they need to prove that they are who they say they are, and you need to know that up early, and that will save you all of that setup later on. So we're working there. We've talked, I have talked ad nauseum about biometrics. We need to get beyond that. I'm a big I need to get beyond passwords. You'll edit that later. We take that out. We've got to get rid of passwords. Biometrics are an important part of that. Interestingly, though, biometrics are not, like anything in security, a silver bullet. They've got to be used in conjunction with other prevention tools and detection tools, because they're just another layer that's got to be got through. Make it difficult as possible for someone to get into systems, and you will win. Yeah? Make it too easy for them, and they'll find a way to exploit it. And the final piece, detection. When we think about detection, is if we've put the moat in and we've put up the guards on the front of the drawbridge and we've checked people through, we want to know that when they come through, even if one or two get through, we can still find them, pull them out, and kind of extract and make sure we deal with it. Detection tools, fraud detection, you will constantly hear us talk about AI here, and I can make a mention because we were talking about it early on, is we were just purchasing an AI business yesterday out of San Francisco, which is part of our building our detection systems to make sure that we keep everybody safe. Why does that benefit you? Is because you still sometimes get declined, your card maybe gets declined or your payment gets declined and you don't know why. It's just it looks too irregular. In future, the analysis itself will allow us to be able to identify what is real and what is not real, and we'll be able to make sure that you are safe when you're making your card payment or whatever other form of payment you're making, but actually you're not being compromised and you're not being declined. So how do these things come together? Well, in an Internet of Things world, I mean, all this technology we talk about here, I mentioned cards several times there, but I also mentioned phones. So the technology we put together is a technology that now sits behind all of the big pays that you see in the marketplace. It's the same technology being used with their front end on it because it's designed that it should fit across all systems and it should be interoperable and secure everywhere. So if we think about it, is when you look at the next set of devices, what's going to happen? I think there's some big challenges, and that's why you need intelligent connectivity. Everything, the only thing you can guarantee is it will all be connected. And if it's connected, you need to be able to keep it safe. But you can't rely on the device itself. And let me give you a couple of examples. In your pocket, many of you have a phone. I would venture that phone is probably between 400 and 600 pounds worth of value. It's probably a top end, and it's got some cool techniques built into it and capabilities built into it and sensors, and it can do a lot of things. Yeah? Just at the same time, though, we're talking about a $40 phone with a lot of those features turning up in the market probably in the next year or so. And they're being built already in various parts of the world. So are we going to assume that everything is equal, that every device is equal, and if it has a sensor on it, that sensor has the same capability, the same failure rate, the same acceptance? We can't. Nor can we try and find that, because we can't look at everybody's device with everybody's software and work out what they do. So what we need to do is help you understand that we have levels of assurance we can look at, and we can check those devices at various points. Intelligent connectivity. You're working from a high-end device, we know it's safe, pass it through. It looks dubious, there's something else there, ask for a backup. That's how the system will work. It will also work in terms of what I call the coffee in the car syndrome. If you're looking for a coffee, you don't want to be hassled. You're probably in a rush. You need the coffee. So you want to be able to make the payment and move on. If you're buying a car, do you want that same kind of one-touch move off and drive off? Because if you can do it, can someone else do it? And that's the big point, is how do you get the levels correct? And of course, finally, in the Internet of Things, while we think of it being 50 billion devices, it's easy to get our mind drawn into the idea that's 50 billion mobile phones. But it's not. It's fridges and watches and cars and all sorts of things, some of which will have no ability to pick up a sensor. They'll have no screen. They'll have no keyboard. You're going to have to find ways to be able to work those things together. So that's critical to how we think about intelligent connectivity. Now, I promised when I was talking to the organizers I would bring a new piece of data, and I thought it was particularly relevant because it only got launched last week. I don't know if anybody saw it last week, but we've done a piece of work between Mastercard and Fletcher at the International School of Diplomacy in America, and they've been stalwarts of driving a lot of work around how is digital evolving across the world. So we've been working on it for about a year now. It got launched last week, so it was a breathe a sigh of relief if I was going to come and share it today. But let me just take you to a couple of slides on it. So the first thing they did was they analyzed the data of 60 nations with 170 attributes. And they broke them down looking at the drivers of demand and supply, innovation, which is startups, fintechs, et cetera, and institution. What are the governments doing to help make sure it's all supported, and how is enterprise working to make things better? And those 4 drivers then go into creating what we call the DEI score on the y-axis. Along the bottom axis, we've been able to isolate the data from 2008 all the way up to the end of 2015. And that's because you're looking at economic data. And that saves you having to look at anything qual. You can look at real data, and you can say, how is the country actually evolving? How sophisticated are they get as they move higher up the score? And how fast are they moving along the axis in terms of maybe we can draw some conclusions about where countries are evolving? And it built on a first study was done a couple of years ago. And what we see here is we've identified a number of countries that are in what we call the digital elites. And you may have seen it. It was in City AM, it's been on Wall Street Journal, it's been in Harvard Business Review in the last couple of days. But we identified that there are some really interesting traits and characteristics around countries like New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, and the UK. Really interesting. They score well on the digital score, but invariably what's happened is quite often the higher you get up there, the more sophisticated you have, the more your momentum drops back. And you need to be able to keep momentum, as we'll show in a minute. It's very important. So what we're seeing is some really neat stuff. And the more you dig under it, the more you find really interesting pieces. New Zealand isn't sitting in a mainstay area of digital. You know, you think it's in the middle of a, it's lovely. I mean, it's a beautiful part of the world. But it's tough, yeah. But what it's found is it's linking its citizens up with this whole process, and it's been able to make it all play. And they want to be a digital global player. And the UK, and events like this, summarize what the UK is doing well. It's getting its stuff together between the drivers. It's getting good combinations of investment and looking at fintech investment and looking at the sort of stuff that brings this event together and know that it's doing that better than anybody else. So the UK is doing well, but we need to keep momentum, which is why events like this and the people out there trying to sell, we need to keep supporting and keep the momentum going. As well as that study, though, we also find out there are breakout nations, nations which haven't got all of the pieces in place, haven't got the government's protocols and controls in, but they're still doing very well. And then other ones which have done, but they need to get their momentum up. And the momentum comes from innovation. If you drive innovation, you can go to the right. As well as this study, though, where I connected it back to security was we looked at the idea that could we take the analysis of how people behave and plot it versus the environment that the governments and the enterprises and the fintech set up. And we could. And we found that if you look along the scale here, the more sophisticated the market, the less friction you have for the consumers, the more you move to the right-hand side. And therefore, not surprising, more of the developed markets over here. But what we tried to plot it was versus behavior. How is the consumer evolving? How much are they moving over to e-com? How fast are they moving to e-com? And when we first plotted it, we kind of hoped, I suppose, the analysis would start bottom left and go to top right. But we didn't see that trait. We saw various other things happening. We saw, in some areas, countries that are really advanced actually getting irritated. And there's some questions over whether that's digital fatigue or whether we were so excited when we first saw, I'm going to use a brand, an iPhone 3. We were so excited. It did so many different things. But then since then, as it's gone on, you get iPhone 7 and 6, and you go, nah. You know, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you're one of the people that queue outside. But for a lot of people, this phone isn't doing much more than the previous phones. So we've got very high expectations of how digital will evolve. Now, you're amongst the leading advocates of innovation. And I don't know if it strikes you, but I was out there thinking, oh my God, there's so much stuff. And then how do we cut through and make the differences? How do we bring these things up to the fore? A lot of it is about encouraging the scale. What we found was, actually, when we overlaid it, that momentum score from the first chart is critical. If a country has momentum, if a country feels optimistic, if it's driving growth, it will perform better on the scale. Singapore is a great example with Smart Nation. But China doesn't have any of that going for it. But they didn't have anything. They've never lived with dial-ups. They've never lived with the sort of browser-based history through desktops and laptops. They kind of arrived at 4G phones. So their capability is everything looks good. So what we've got to do is make sure that as we bring our innovations forward, we maintain and drive real change through these environments. And we keep the optimism going in the country about why these things all fit. It is good to know that, and he's not here yet, but Matt Hancock was tweeting out about this the other day in terms of the Department of Digital as well, because it is a key part of how we do it. If we think small and we think about our nation, we'll struggle. We need to get the balance right. But the real advantage of the Singapores and the UAE and the New Zealand is they want to be global players in digital, and digital is borderless. Make sure you keep your ambitions high when you're building your products. So to wrap up, The trust battleground is reshaped by technology. I can tell you that it will be about AI and robotics, and it'll be about blockchain and digital identity and biometrics and all of those things. And all of us are probably working on all projects involve those. The key will be is we must understand is we don't have to accept that the marriage proposal for that bottle of milk has to stay, that we can ease the process to make it better for consumers, more convenient, but still retain the quality of assurance and security around the payment. So convenience and ease and security will all come together in a product. Sorry, didn't press it. So where do I finish? I finish by saying it is about collaboration. For a better society, everybody needs to play a part. Everyone that's out there, everyone that's in here, maybe even this guy on stage. We need to think about how we retain trust as we go forward. To have something that looks really good, to know that it will then fail and reputations will be damaged, will affect you and your business model. We have to make better experiences. Security people will always talk about experiences need to be there too now, because we can't deny that we can make things safe and yet not acceptable to the way people buy products. With no more ado, I'm going to open the door for a quick couple of questions if possible. Is that okay? Cool. Right. Any questions? Microphone down to this gentleman here behind the post. He might not be seen. He's waving his hands frantically. Or he's either no, he's not drowning. Can we get him a microphone? She's going to come in behind you.
I came in just as you were finishing your talk, and you were talking about China and Singapore and how these are smart nations. My next question to you is, in 10 years, who do you think will be in the position they're in now? Do you think there'll be more countries in Asia, or do you think we'll see countries that we weren't expecting going into that position? Because obviously it is borderless. And if that's the situation, what do you think could be the legal issues that could come up when you're dealing with these different jurisdictions that might not be used to dealing with those sort of situations?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know who's going to be up there, but I know that you need to exhibit certain behavior. You need to think how you're going to play as a nation, but how you're going to play on a global scale. That's the first one. You need to recognize that actually creating domestic standards around things that mean you're on an island, you look small, is not acceptable. So a lot of the work that's been done around things like PSD2 and America's doing it around cybersecurity is trying to find some common standards. We can't, because it's not closed systems anymore, it's going to be open systems, we need to create balances and checks that help people get it right. But it will be an ongoing thing. Who's going to be up there? I don't know. But a good example would be, look at Estonia. Estonia's got a clear lead in doing some very cool stuff. In the future, it's down to how much countries are committed to be able to drive change.
And my last part of my question is, obviously with destabilized systems like blockchain, I've got a legal background. My name's Ian Rosmarin. People are asking, what do you do if they go wrong? And who do you sue? Now, obviously, you can't sue the hacker because you can sue someone you don't know, but you won't get any money out of them.
Yeah.
How do you think they'll de-risk those systems?
Every problem starts as a problem, and then you've got to work it out. I don't think we all know yet. I think what we do know is innovation is happening really quickly across countries. There are countries in Africa that don't have sanitation yet, and yet have mobile capability. Yeah, you need to make sure the standards are coming up in those countries, and you need to make sure those things are connected. I think there'll be some really interesting challenges around blockchain, but if I take PSD2 as an example, that people that might know the service directive going on about payments now, it is trying to find some common ground and trying to make sure we do the right thing, and then we try and make sure that the wrong things are not being done. So, I mean, their big challenge was how to get fraud down in the online world, and therefore a lot of the work is focused on there. So I think it's to my point is, governments working in public-private enterprise, trying to find solutions and working with the innovators who are in this room, the establishment and the governments to try and find solutions. Okay? You're looking at me. Do you want to have a go at what my title is now? Doesn't matter. Okay, everybody else? No other questions? Thank you. I will leave you to a very hot day, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference. All right? Thank you very much.